Hi guys, Grandjay here and welcome to another one of our videos. Opus 7 has just been released and today's video will be talking about the new win cards of Opus 7. So let's get started.
So the first card we'll be looking at is Illyria. She's a free CP backup. EX Burst, when Illyria enters the field, you may search for one card named Chelinka or a card named Yuri and add it to your hand. So this is a pretty set standard backup that we have in a lot of sets where it's a free CP backup that's EX Burst and it only searches for one or two very specific targets. In this case, this card, its element fits right and its category fits right and its EX Burst as well. So this set has a big focus on Crystal Chronicles in Wind, and so Chelinka is a Wind character and Yuri is a Light character that is most likely going to be played in Wind deck. So all of these factors combining up with the fact that Illyria is a Wind backup as well just fits very, very nicely. So this is one of those backups that's going to see play, simply because Chelinka works well with Yuri. Yuri is a particularly strong card, and Illyria obviously searches for both of them. So this card is going to sit into that deck archetype very, very easily. I'm pretty sure if you guys want to try Chelinka and Yuri, there was no doubt in your mind you're going to play this card, right? So the real question about this card is, do you want to play 2 copies or 3 copies of this card, right? So typically with these sort of searches, you only want to run 2 copies because the third copy is kind of dead in your hands. But it is a EX Burst and it's searching you for a card that you're almost always going to want to have in your hand. At the very worst, it's going to search you for Chelinka. If you don't want to search for Yuri and clog your hand up with another light card, searching for Chelinka for EX Burst is always going to be good. So I like this card very much, and interestingly enough, it also gets the benefit of having Job Type Mother, which is relevant to another card later in this set. So this card is pretty strong. It's going to fit into your Crystal Chronicles deck, and that is a deck that wants to play Wind anyway, so it ticks all the boxes. Competitive play, yes, 10 out of 10. Next card is Al-Hannelm. It is a 2 CP backup. It's Crystal Chronicles category. First ability is Dull. Choose one forward, deal it 2,000 damage. You can only use this ability if you control a card named Chelinka or a card named Yuri. Second ability is Dull. Deal 2,000 damage to all forwards your opponent controls. You can only use this ability if you control a card named Chelinka and a card named Yuri. So, this card is actually a pretty powerful card, right? Just off a Dull ability to deal 2,000 damage, either as just a ping effect or either as a spread effect, is actually very, very strong on a base 2 CP backup, right? Obviously, the restriction of you having to have a Chelinka or a Yuri, while the restriction of you having to have Chelinka or Yuri on the field is usually a pretty intense or pretty difficult restriction to make, because this deck is going to be built around Chelinka and Yuri, it's going to be a super easy condition for you to fulfill. So I don't think that this is very much a drawback at all. Do note that both these abilities, you only need to have Chelinka or Yuri, or Chelinka and Yuri on the field on activation. Upon resolution, it doesn't matter what happens to your Chelinka or Yuri. So even if your opponent blows up your Chelinka on Yuri, upon resolution of this effect, it does not matter. It doesn't fizzle it out. So do keep that in mind. So it's actually a much more safer, flexible ability because of that. If you do consider like Chelinka's ability, and probably I should have talked about Chelinka first, but Chelinka increases the damage that all your Crystal Chronicle characters deal, which does increase the damage Al-Hannelm deals. So when you think about it that way, if you have Chelinka on the field, its Dull ability is just like shoot a guy for free K, and its second ability is spread free K. And both these are really powerful effects, especially considering all you're doing is just dulling a backup. It's not even like Dull break backup, it's just Dull backup, right? And considering that Wind has a ton of ways to reactivate its backups, whether in the form of monsters, whether in terms of like forward like enter-play abilities, or whether in terms of like summons like Ashura or Diabolos, you're able to reactivate your backups a lot. So it means that if you want to play the Chelinka Yuri strategy and you have ways to reactivate your backups, you're going to, in a lot of cases, just use this backup to just hit for like, even one reactivation makes this card hit for 6k, right? And that's a lot. It means that you're clearing out small forwards. If you have 2 reactivation abilities, you get to trigger this off 3 times, and you're hitting 9k for the turn, right? So if you combo this with just like, say, a No-No, the one that reactivates a backup whenever you attack, it's actually fantastic, right? You do a party attack, or you attack with 2 guys, you get to reactivate this card twice. You've all of a sudden, this turn, you've already hit a guy for 3 pings of 3k or 9k worth of damage, so that's fantastic. So this card is really, really strong. Obviously, much better on the field while you have Chelinka rather than having Yuri, but there's a ton of ways to combine it with other effects that can reduce power in Wind, such as Barbarisha or such as Diabolos, putting one of your opponent's forwards down to 1,000 power, and then using Al-Hannelm to finish them off is another great combo as well. So this card is a great element, fits into the FFCC archetype. It has a lot of support in the cards that are already in that element, and it gets even better when you have these cards on the field. So great card if you're running the FFCC strategy, you're going to be putting 3 copies of this card into your deck anyways. So the next card to talk about is Alexander. It is a 2 CP EX burst summon. Choose one forward to cost 5 or more your opponent controls, return it to its owner's hand. If Alexander results from EX burst, break it instead. Now, out of all the summons from the set, this is probably actually the one I like the most. This is probably my favorite one, which isn't saying much considering that there are only 6 summons in this set, 1 of each element, right? So, with all the other summons of this set, all the base costs of these summons are actually overpriced. You're either paying 4 CP to use Ifrit, or you're paying 3 CP to use Shiva, or you're paying 4 CP to use Yojimbo. Those are all more expensive when you play them from your hand for alternative effects that you can be getting, right? Whereas Alexander, this is a different scenario. You are playing a card that's cheaper than summons that we've had that are its alternatives. So with all the like win cards that penalize your opponent for having forwards of cost 5 or more, Alexander gives you a cheaper cost, although its base effect is a little bit weaker. In this case, you are just returning your opponent's forward of 5 or more back to their hand, which is fine. Now, obviously, this will depend upon what sort of 5 CP forward you are putting up to your opponent's hand, but as a 2 CP summon, there are times where you're willing to just play it to just return one of your opponent's big forwards back to their hand, and just so you can swing through. So it is worthwhile casting this. And then if you do hit it off of EX Burst, it becomes much, much better. In my opinion, this is exactly what the other summons of this set really should have been like. The base effect should be like something weaker, but still at a good cost for what they do. And then the bonus effect should be like much, much stronger or much better, right? So in my opinion, this is my favorite summon of the set. It's better than all the other summons because it is playable. You do not feel bad when you cast it, because there are times where you do want to cast it, and when you do cast it, you're getting a pretty reasonable deal when you do. Next card is Vata. It's a 4 CP forward, 8,000 power. I have spoiled this a little bit in one of my earlier spoiler videos. It is one of the 4 generals. When Vata enters the field, if the cost to play Vata was only paid with win CP, activate all win backups you control. So this is a fantastic card. As a 4 CP AK, it's completely on curve. So if you were to just play it without triggering off its ability, yes, it is vanilla and that kind of sucks. But most of the time when you do play this, you're going to want to trigger off his enter play ability, which most of the time you should be able to do. If you play it in a mono win strategy, there's almost no excuse for you to not always just get its ability, right? And when you do, effectively this is a 0 CP AK. It's a AK forward that you get to put in for free because you're reactivating all your backups. Technically, if you consider the fact that if you've already used up one of your win backups and then you get to reactivate 5 backups, this is technically a minus 1 CP AK, right? So it's great in that regard. So like talking about the like Al-Hannelm Crystal Chronicles type thing, you could use Al-Hannelm's ability and then you can just play Vata with your other 4 CP, reactivate all your stuff, and then you get another shoot with Al-Hannelm as well, right? So Al-Hannelm's great, Vata's great. Vata, unfortunately, is not a Crystal Chronicles character, is FFL character, Final Fantasy Legends character, so there is no real synergy there. But in a mono win strategy, it's absolutely perfect to just go slot straight into the deck. As a card in a duo color deck, potentially still might see play. It's not too unreasonable for you to dull 2 win backups and discard 1 card from your hand that's a win card. In order to put this card into play, you do only pay it all with win CP to reactivate all your win backups. Although if you are playing a duo color deck, you're probably not going to get more than, say, 2 or 3 backups worth of value back from it. So he's most potent in mono wind, and when you do play him, he's absolutely fantastic when you do. So the next card we'll be talking about is Dancer. It is a recategorization of a Dancer that we have seen in Opus 1. It's a free CP backup. It's a standard unit. Its ability is Dull. Deal 1,000 damage to all forwards and your opponent controls. So this was previously a FFT or Final Fantasy Tactics backup, but now it is a Final Fantasy V backup. So it is fundamentally the same card, except its just category has been changed. It's still a standard unit at free CP backup as well. So this card was actually not bad back in Opus 1, but I do not think that this kind of really held up against the test of time, especially considering that there are other great win backups that can now fundamentally also just deal damage, right? So it's a free CP backup, which is really much more competitive now. There's so much competition in the free CP backup slot that I don't think Dancer can really sort of hold up compared to those other backups. Dull to deal 1,000 damage to all your opponent's forwards is fine, but you have to pay for a more expensive backup to put this card into play. And 1,000 damage is not a huge amount, although it is relevant. Now, if you want to just deal 1,000 damage, typically the strategy that most people go down is using Cactor. even though it's not a backup, it's generally much more flexible than using Dancer. So because of that, I think Dancer is a little bit outclassed compared to other alternative like ping sources that Wind has available to them. Next card is Ranger. It is a 2 CP standard unit forward at 4,000 power, so it's a little bit below the curve. But when Ranger enters the field, choose one monster of cost 3 or less your opponent controls. If the cost is paid to play Ranger included Earth CP, break it. Its secondary ability is when Ranger attacks, choose one forward opponent controls, deal it 2,000 damage. So its first ability is very interesting. It's similar to Cyclone Enforcer, which is a free CP 7k forward that when it enters play, you can destroy a monster of cost 2 or less. In this case, Ranger does give you the benefit of being able to destroy a monster of 3 or less, although the cost does require you to play part of his CP cost with Earth. So if you do have Earth CP available, why not play Cyclone Enforcer, right? So that is a consideration. Now, the benefit to having Ranger over Cyclone Enforcer is that you can hit a monster that's a little bit larger, but you have to really consider what sort of monsters are being played in the current metagame, and it seems like most of the monsters that are being played are all 1 cost, 2 cost monsters that have some sort of utility effect or have some sort of effect that triggers off once off, or some sort of effect that transforms them into monsters, transforms them into forwards. So you don't have too many monsters that are larger than 2. Usually the monsters that are larger than 2 are generally those that transform into forwards. So any sort of removal that can destroy forwards will usually be able to handle them, right? And there are not that many problems that are unique to only Ranger being able to deal with, because there are not that many monsters that cost 3 that you want to deal with. So in that regard, Ranger is not particularly useful in the current metagame, and unless we see more monsters that are around that 3 cost mark, then potentially we might see Ranger being played. But at this stage, if you have access to Earth, you're probably just going to play Cyclone Enforcer instead. The next card we'll be dealing with is Cal-Gat. It's a 6 cost 8,000 power forward. It is a Dawn Warrior. When Cal-Gat enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, play one job Dawn Warrior among them onto the field, and return the other cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. So this card is a new card in the Dawn Warrior job. Still fundamentally only have 4 Dawn Warriors, but he has changed his element from lightning to wind. That being said though, him changing from lightning to wind is actually pretty relevant to this archetype, right? Because now you can play all 4 Dawn Warriors in just 2 elements, right? So you got Dorgan and Cal-Gat, which have now become wind, and you have Galuf and Zezat, which are now Earth, right? So within Earth Wind itself, you can play all 4 Dawn Warriors, right? And obviously, the Dawn Warriors, like, especially Cal-Gat, it does have most benefits when you have more Dawn Warriors on the field, so this actually helps to its synergy, as well as Wind and Earth already having some pretty good synergies as well, right? So if you do want to build Dawn Warriors, you can now just do it with just 2 elements, right? Unless you want to play some of the classic Dawn Warriors and splash in a 3rd element, which is possible. But this card's like value is actually not too bad, considering all the other Dawn Warriors are at least 4 CP 8Ks or higher. Cal-Gat, if he does proc his ability, is actually getting you massive value. It is a lot of value for what it does. Unfortunately, revealing top 5 cards of your deck is actually a pretty small sample size. So if you want to reasonably consistently hit this effect off the top 5 cards of your deck, you're going to need generally about 14-ish targets for your deck. So you're going to want to really up your Dawn Warrior count, and in just purely Earth and Wind, you're going to have to run like doubles of Galuf and doubles of Dorgan as well to really up that number to a point where you're able to hit this effect more consistently. But that being said though, it does seem like it might lead to a more... That being said though, this card probably will lead to a viable, fun, casual strategy in my opinion. The next card we'll be talking about is Condor. It is a 4 CP monster, and it is the Wind's version of the transforming monster type from this set. Condor, its ability is when a backup enters your field, if you control 5 or more backups, Condor also becomes a forward with 8,000 power, and when Condor attacks, activate all Wind characters other than Condor you control. This effect does not end at the end of turn. This ability will not trigger if Condor is a forward. So out of all the monster like transforming triggering abilities, this is definitely the strongest. It's obviously also the most costly monster to compensate for it as well. 4 CP 8k is like on curve, so you're not getting a discounted body with this monster in particular, but you're getting a very, very, very strong ability from when it attacks, right? Being able to reactivate all your Wind characters is extremely strong, especially considering Wind is a strategy that wants to ramp up a lot more backups. You will get a lot of value for this. So this monster is actually really, really powerful, and if you do proc it off, it's actually a really, really big swing in my opinion. The real restriction to this card though is the fact that you can only transform it when you reach 5 backups, right? And at that stage, it becomes difficult to use more of these copies because you have to break a backup, then put another fresh backup down in order to trigger off any more Condors that you might play. So this is the most difficult to trigger monster, and it's the most expensive one, but it comes with the most potent effect that's actually extremely strong. which means that if you are playing a mono win strategy, which is exactly the sort of deck that you want to play this in, possibly this is one of those cards that you might run one or at most two copies of, so you don't want to be locked up with these cards in your hand. But if you do trigger off, it's such a big swing in your favor that I think it's probably worth trying this card out when you do have that situation occur. The next card is Cacti Conductor. It's a 2 CP backup. When Cacti Conductor enters the field, choose one forward. During this turn, the next damage dealt to it becomes 0. Its secondary ability is Win Win Dull. Put Cacti Conductor into a break zone. Choose one forward. During this turn, next damage dealt to it becomes 0 instead. So it's effectively two of the same effects, right? Now, this card is very similar to Samurai from the Fire Element set review, in that it's got two effects that are identical, one when it comes to play and one as a backup breaking type ability. So in both these cases, I think the ability is actually very solid. It means you can attack aggressively with your forwards. So on play, you can put it down. If you already got a forward on the field, you can then swing in with your forward. So there's no real risk of your forward when you're attacking them through. Your opponent has to deal two separate packets of damage in order to kill your forward, right? Which then leads you to have like much more aggressive plays. If your opponent doesn't want to block it, then it does help you like swing through for damage, right? So this card on its enter ability is pretty reasonable, not as good as Samurai in my opinion, but it has less restriction in terms of its backup destruction ability, which is much, much better on defense actually. So Cacti Conductor's secondary ability of preventing damage is actually really strong. You can actually use it to just counter a destruction or like a damage type ability, so you can like protect your forwards with it, which is actually pretty good. And considering its cost, it's actually pretty reasonable. Win-win dull break. And considering this card is a 2 CP backup that has good value early on and good value later on, it's actually a very good backup. And I think that this card is reasonably playable, especially considering that there are like so many win strategies that want you to just ramp up a ton of backups. You get to have a whole toolbox of 2 CP win backups that you want to try building into your deck, and Cacti Conductor is probably one of those ones that I'm going to want to try, although he does tend to lend himself more towards a mid-rangey win sort of strategy, where you do have forwards that can fight your opponent's forwards, but they'll probably trade, so the enter playability will allow your mid-range forwards to fight a little bit better, and the secondary ability will help you keep your mid-range forwards or your larger forwards on the field for a little bit longer as well. This card is pretty solid, but probably more for a mid-rangey win deck. So the next card we have is Thief. It's a 2 CP backup. Win-win dull. Put Thief into a break zone. Your opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her deck into a break zone. If both cards are the same element, draw 1 card. So this is very similar to a Thief that we had in a previous set, where it was win 1 dull, put Thief in the break zone. Your opponent puts the top 2 cards of the deck into a break zone. So you're fundamentally paying the same amount of CP, and you're still breaking the backup, and the backup still costs the same. But the only one change is that this card, instead of paying green 1 or wind 1, you're paying wind dull, right? So you're paying the same amount, but you're paying just like, you're restricted to paying 2 win CP in this case, right? For the bonus of if you mill 2 cards of the same element of your opponent's deck, then you get to draw a card, right? So this card is actually a huge improvement from the previous Thief. The change of restricting both the elements to wind is not a huge like increase to the cost at all. It is not significantly more difficult to play win-win than win-1. So in my opinion, the cost is virtually the same, but the benefit is actually so much better. If you're playing against a mono element strategy, this is almost always just going to be like a draw 1 card, right? That's a huge benefit. Even if your opponent is playing a dual color strategy or a dual color deck, if you assume that like both elements are 50-50, then you still have a 50% chance of hitting like a pair of the same element when you mill 2 cards off the top of their deck, right? So even in a dual color strategy, it's a 50% chance of you drawing a card at effectively no increased cost from the previous Thief. Obviously, this card is only relevant to a mill strategy, but in a mill strategy that was previously using Thief, this card is a significant improvement of it, and just getting you 1 extra card for doing the same fundamental thing is actually fantastic, right? I've got a mate who loves playing mill, and I'm pretty sure that this card is probably one of his favorite cards of the set, and while not most of us play mill, it definitely is a very fun, casual experience that can be very competitive at some times as well. I definitely do want to try rebuilding mill for you guys, and do want to show you guys what I have come up with this card. So the next card is Zoo. It is a 2 CP win monster, and it is Win's variety of the discard monsters. So its first ability is put Zoo into a break zone, activate all backups you control. So this is a pretty strong effect, very similar to Layak, and its secondary ability is discard Zoo, choose up to 2 backups you control, activate them. You can only use this ability if Zoo is in your hand. So its first ability of this breaking it to reactivate all your backups, that's actually very similar to Layak, but in my opinion, it seems much, much weaker than Layak, right? So first of all, if you do consider the fact that you are paying 2 CP to put this card into play, as opposed to 1 CP, to put Layak into play, that's already 1 CP difference, right? In addition to this, Layak, when it's destroyed, it draws your card. Zoo, however, does not draw your card. So the difference between Layak and Zoo, so the cost of choosing when you want to use a reactivation ability between Zoo and Layak, the difference between these two cards is 3 CP. So when you think about it that way, and you're only getting 5 CP worth of value back from both these cards, you're only getting half as much value from Zoo as you are getting from Layak. So for the benefit of triggering whenever you want, you're getting half the value. So in my opinion, Zoo as a way to just defensively activate backups is not nearly as good as Layak, in my opinion. However, the one situation where this card will see more play than Layak is in combo decks. So first of all, there is a infinite loop that you can play with Zoo and a couple other cards to infinitely loop your backups, which then allows you to infinitely mill your opponent's strategy using Riku. So I've done a video on that already on Facebook, so you guys can check my Facebook page if you want to see that particular loop. It's a little bit difficult to do, but obviously with infinite loops, of course, they're supposed to be difficult to pull off if you're going to instantly win with them. Other than that, the real value for Zoo is you get to play it at an earlier stage of the game, and then on a particular swing turn where you might want to spend, let's say 9 or 10 CP worth of value to get a really, really, really powerful combo, then Zoo allows you to do that. If you can break up certain costs of cards, so if you can play like a 5 CP card that you want to, and then you want to play another 5 CP card on the same turn, you can play a 5 CP card, then use Zoo, break Zoo, reactivate all 5 backups, and then play another 5 CP card, right? And some sort of like 2-card combo that's really strong that uses 2 expensive cards. Generally, those combos are not very viable because you're going to have to bank a lot of cards because you use all 5 of your backups, and then the rest you have to pay with your cards. So generally, those strategies are very difficult to pull off because of the cost of those combos. Now, Zoo will allow you to alleviate that cost by banking up some of that cost ahead of time, right? So you can put this Zoo down at some point when you want to trigger off the combo and go, you play some of the cards, trigger off Zoo, reactivate your backups, then play the second half of the combo, right? So Zoo is most useful for that situation, in my opinion. As for his discard effect, this is actually one of the least impressive discard effects, in my opinion, although it does have its utility. So fundamentally, Zoo, you can always discard it for 2 CP to cast a card, right? So discarding it to choose 2 backups you control and activate them, you are actually not getting any sort of advantage like CP-wise, right? There's only 2 advantages to using Zoo's second ability. So the first advantage is that by reactivating backups, you get to use their dull ability. So any sort of backup that has a dull ability that you want to use, Zoo can reactivate them to use again. So I go back to the example of Al-Hannelm. If you want to reuse its backup, you can always discard Zoo to reactivate an Al-Hannelm and to reuse its ability again, right? So that's one reason why you want to use Zoo, to use those dull backups again. The second reason why you would want to use Zoo is to allow you to pay for odd costed cards, right? So if you discarded Zoo, you get 2 CP worth of value, but you can only use them for 1 card, right? So if you want to play 2 odd costed cards, it's very difficult to play those cards efficiently without having backups, right? And having Zoo available, you can discard it, reactivate 2 backups, and those backups can be each individually used to help you pay for those odd costed cards. So that's the only other reason why the discard effect for Zoo is relevant to you. So these are both pretty niche situations for this card, or pretty niche uses for this card. So in my opinion, this card is probably going to be used mostly for its first ability to combo stuff, and occasionally might be useful on a secondary ability to reactivate backups. So the next card we'll be looking at is the first legendary of the set. It is Chelinka. She is a free CP 7k forward. If a category FFCC character you control deals damage to a forward, the damage increases by 1000 instead. When Chelinka enters the field, deal 1000 damage to all forwards your opponent's control. When Chelinka forms a party with a card named Yuri and attacks, choose 1 forward or monster, break it. I've said this before in the past, any situation where a forward is on curve and has 3 good effects, then it is overpowered, and there's a reason why Chelinka is a legendary of this set. Each one of these abilities is not super amazing by itself, but in the context of the deck that you're building and in context of the strategy that you're playing, it works out really well, right? So, first of all, increases the damage of all FFCC characters by 1000. So this is not only their ability damage, but also their combat damage as well. So effectively, all you guys just punch for 1k harder in combat, right? Secondly, its ability of dealing 1000 damage to all forwards your opponent controls when it enters play. This is obviously magnified or amplified by her own first ability. So when she comes into play, deals 2000 damage to all your opponent's forwards, assuming that on resolution, Chelinka is still alive and on the field. So straight away, that's actually pretty good value, considering that there are a lot of effects in the wind element that reduces your opponent's power, such as Diablos or such as Barbarisha. So this combos really well with them already. This also combos really well with a whole bunch of FFCC cards already. So for example, it combos well with Al-Hannelm, which is a card that can deal 2,000 damage to one of your opponent's forwards when it's dull while Chelinka's on the field. So obviously that gets amplified by 1,000 power, putting it up to 3,000 damage per packet, which is really, really good. So first two effects work great with each other. The third effect is kind of just a bonus effect of if you party attack with a card named Yuri, then you can choose a forward or monster and break it, right? So this is great as well. Obviously, if you're playing Yuri, you're probably playing Chelinka in wind as well, so this just combos up really well. Now, the reason why Yuri is able to party attack with Chelinka is because Yuri's ability to be all other element colors except for dark. So that's why Yuri is able to party attack with anyone. So that's kind of like a cool little niche bonus of Yuri itself. And when you do, you get to blow up on your opponent's forwards and monsters. So this is actually pretty good because wind doesn't really have too many ways of just like destroying a forward outside of just dealing them damage, right? So this gives them a nice little out to handle those sort of situations, and it gives wind a way to deal with forwards when Emperor is on the field. A lot of wind's removal abilities are all based upon you using your activated abilities, so Chelinka gives you a way, with in conjunction Yuri of course, to deal with the Emperor. So yeah, she is a fantastic card. All of her abilities just work well in the archetype, so she's everything that the archetype needs, and it's great. It's an on-curve body as well. Artwork is fantastic, so yeah. Big 10 out of 10 tick in my opinion. Next card is Chocobo. It is a 2 CP 4,000 power forward. It's a little bit below the curve, but it has a pretty powerful ability. So dull, choose one forward other than Chocobo. It gains plus 3,000 power until the end of the turn. When that forward leaves the field this turn, put Chocobo into the break zone. So this is actually a very interesting take on a Chocobo. Usually most Chocobos that we see are usually party attacking type Chocobos. But in this case, we have a Chocobo that has a very interesting power to just boost a forward's power by 3,000. So this is actually a really strong ability. There's not many effects in the game that can boost a forward by that much power, even though it does come at the drawback of if that forward dies, then blow up this Chocobo as well. So, but considering that this Chocobo is pretty cheap and you get such a significant power boost from it, and they're pretty spammable, Chocobos are pretty spammable, and there's a lot of ways to get them in for free and to search for them for free. This card is actually a really nice card in my opinion. It's definitely one of my more favorite Chocobos in the game, to be honest, right now. And the fact that he's category WOF is kind of just a little bonus, I guess. Like, there are a couple of cards that do incentivize you on playing more WOF cards. Do note though that the forward that you're giving a power bonus to, if it is destroyed or broken in response to this effect, so if you're using this effect and your opponent responds by using some sort of removal ability on that forward, this Chocobo does not die because this effect has not resolved yet, and it will not resolve because the forward is no longer a legal target because it's no longer on the field, right? So that's kind of like a inherent kind of just bonus to this effect in that, yeah. Usually when you play effects that increase the power of your forwards, usually your opponent will try to bait you into it. So your opponent will wait for you to use some sort of buff on your card, and then they use a removal ability in response to that, which not only does it fizzle the effect, it destroys the forward in response, and also you've already paid the cost to give the power up bonus. But in this situation, it's actually not that bad, because the cost of giving your guy a plus 3,000 power, which is a significant power boost, by the way, that cost was just dull this forward, right? And this forward is pretty cheap to begin with, right? So it's actually a really strong power boost, and it's on a really small, cheap, effective body, and it also has a great name in the form of Chocobo, and it's also a standard unit, which means you can spam these guys out. So this is a great card, and certain strategies that may want to benefit from having guys at a certain threshold power, such as the new Gilgamesh if it does receive 10,000 power, or such as Ramza if it gets a 10,000 power as well. Chocobo is a great card to add into those strategies because it allows you to just like buff them up, and it's a very cheap and efficient way to do so. So because of that, I think that this card offers a lot of utility, and even in just some more basic strategies, win strategies, this card's effect is actually really, really strong. Next is Dorgan, and this card, man, it is a 4 CP 8k forward. When a backup enters the field, choose one forward your opponent controls, remove from the game for as long as Dorgan is on the field. So there are a lot of confusing rulings on this card, but we'll take it one by one, right? So first of all, when you remove a forward using Dorgan's ability, that forward is just kind of floating in the remove from play pile, and when Dorgan is removed, they all come back, right? So everything comes back. So no matter what you do in terms of Dorgan, whether you remove him from the game or whether you remove his ability, those forwards will all come back when Dorgan leaves. There's no way to prevent those forwards from coming back, right? Now, in terms of those forwards coming back, when they do come back, they get all their interplay abilities again, so that is one downside to this card. And thirdly, if your opponent already controls a forward on the field, when they come back, your opponent isn't able to put them back onto the field, so they just kind of stay removed, right? So that's kind of one little aspect to it. Another little aspect to it, and like Chris Matisky does a great video on this, discussing all the ruling points of this card. If your opponent has 2 cards that are the same character name in their remove from play pile that you've removed from Dorgan, and they both come back when Dorgan comes into play, they both come back, and then they're both immediately destroyed because you can only have one character on the field at the same time. All right. So in summary, Dorgan removes guys from the field. There's no way to stop the ability of them coming back in. If there's already a guy on the field, when they come back in, they don't come back in. If there are two cards of the same character that are coming back in at the same time, they're all destroyed. And the same with if multiple light characters coming in at the same time. So that's kind of the general summary of Dorgan, right? That being said, though, Dorgan, in my opinion, is probably the most difficult forward to play well and effectively in this entire set. There are so many ways where this card can just backfire so hard on the player, and there are so many ways in which both players can play this card or play against this card very skillfully. So this is most skill-intensive card by far, right? First of all, like in terms of its ability, yes, you get to temporarily deal with a forward right now when you put it back up into play, which for Wind is actually pretty good because Wind has a lot of great backups that wants to play, it wants to ramp up, and it has a lot of these quality 2 CP backups that can break themselves for effects, so you can trigger its ability multiple times during the game, even if you do reach to the 5 CP mark or the 5 backup mark. Now, the reason why this card gets really, really difficult to play is there are critical times where if your opponent removes Dorgan, it could be extremely detrimental to you. So if you remove one of your opponent's forwards that has a really strong interplay ability, you've effectively doubled it up. So you do not want to use Dorgan's ability on any forward that has like a really strong interplay ability, such as Sephiroth or such as Nidhogg. So do not do that. Do not do that. So that's the first aspect of Dorgan. Second aspect of Dorgan is if you stockpile a whole bunch of your opponent's forwards like into their remove from play zone, when your opponent does destroy your Dorgan, they get them all back, right? Imagine if you remove like 2 or 3 of your opponent's guys, and then your opponent plays like a Sin or a Shantoto, wipes the field, right? Because they got rid of Dorgan, not only do they have their Shantoto on the field, or not only do they have their Sin on the field, but they get all their remove from play guys back in for free, and they trigger all their interplay abilities as well, right? So if you stockpile a whole bunch of your opponent's dudes, and your opponent uses like one of those like removal abilities to get them whole back, right? And that's just a massive field for you to deal with. So you obviously have to like, at which point you're obviously going to have to counter with something like Sin or Shantoto on your own, right? So Dorgan is a very, very difficult card to play effectively, but it's such a strong tempo play when you do get it though. So because of that, I think a lot of players should generally try to avoid using this card because there's a lot of ways that this card is going to dick you over. And this card is definitely one of those cards where when he's on the field, the smart player is probably going to get the advantage of the game from this card alone. The next card we'll be talking about is Nash. It is a 4 CP 7k forward, so it's a little bit below the curve, but it has EX Burst. When Nash enters the field, choose one forward of cost 1 your opponent controls, or one monster of cost 2 or less your opponent controls, break it. Now this card is very similar to Cyclone Enforcer, which is a card that we were talking about a little bit earlier in this video, because it fundamentally has the same removal ability as Cyclone Enforcer, but it has an EX Burst as well, and it also has the ability to destroy a forward of cost 1 or less as well. So firstly, let's look at the ability to destroy a forward of cost 1, right? In the metagame right now, from my understanding, there is only one forward of cost 1 that is actually seeing play, and that is Leo. So, except in a very specific instance that you're playing against an Earth deck that is playing Leo, Nash's first ability of destroying a forward of cost 1 is almost virtually never going to be relevant at all, right? So you can virtually just kind of scrub that out. As for the second part of his ability of destroying a monster of 2 or less, so Win already has ways to deal with monsters, and that is in the form of Alexander. It is a 2 CP summon that can either destroy a monster of any cost, or can reactivate one of your backups and draw a card, right? Now, that card is an EX Burst as well, and I think that that's the best comparison for Nash, right? So the benefit of playing Nash is that it is a forward, so you can always just play it as a 4 CP 7k, which is not ideal, but if you just want to get more dudes on the board, it is something there, right? And it's a Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles card, so it does have synergies with Chelinka. As for its EX Burst is weaker than Alexander's, because this can only destroy a forward of cost 1 or a monster of cost 2, whereas Alexander can destroy any monster at all. Now, if your opponent doesn't have any monsters on the field, then Nash's EX Burst becomes effectively blank. Whereas Alexander will always give you the alternative to reactivate one of your backups and draw a card, which is a much better EX Burst in the situation where your opponent just doesn't have monsters, right? And while monsters are good, it's not like every deck is guaranteed to be playing monsters, right? So that being said, in my opinion, If you want monster removal and you want to have it on an EX Burst card as well, I would much rather play Alexander, because when you hit off an EX Burst, you're going to be able to hit any monster, and if your opponent doesn't have any monsters, you have an EX Burst that gives you a card. Whereas Nash, it's an underpowered body, and its EX Burst is more narrow. So in my opinion, Nash is not as good as Alexander. That's why I don't think you'll really see any play. Next card is Ninja. It is a 4 CP AK forward. When Ninja enters the field, choose one forward. If the cost paid to play Ninja included fire CP, deal it 4,000 damage. So this is very similar to an Opus 1 card that we got in the name of Furion, where when he enters play, it deals 4,000 damage to one of your opponent's forwards, and it's also a 4 CP AK. So Ninja is very similar, although it does come with the restriction of you having to use fire CP in order to play it, right? So in a deck where you have access to fire CP, Ninja and Furion are both interchangeable fundamentally with their abilities, right? So why would you play Ninja over Furion? There are some benefits to playing Ninja in that A, it's a standard unit, so you can have multiple of these guys on the field, as well as having access or benefits to being a standard unit. So if you are playing like the classic Warrior of Lights in the form of Arc that buffs all your standard units by +1, or if you're playing a card like Lunaf that gives all your standard units like haste, that's the advantage of playing Ninja. So this is one of the few sort of pay a second element standard use that I think is actually kind of better than its alternative. So in both cases, you're going to have to spend fire CP to get the effect, right? And then Ninja just has all the bonuses of being a standard unit, which is very relevant in Wind because Wind has support for that as well. So in my opinion, Ninja is actually pretty legit, but I'm not sure what sort of deck might want to play this. So the second legendary of the set is Bart. It's a free CP forward at 7,000 power. When Bart enters the field, choose up to 2 category 5 characters to activate them. So this is a pretty good value card. So at the very least, you can just always reactivate 2 backups to make Bart a 1 CP 7k. So in terms of like cost value, it's pretty good. This set has released so many FF5 cards, so many category 5 cards that Bart will be able to reactivate a whole bunch of standard unit forwards, or reactivate a whole bunch of backups, or he can reactivate just a whole bunch of very specific Final Fantasy V characters. So its ability is actually pretty flexible. And on a small body like free CP 7k, it's actually pretty easy to get its effect. So you can always consider it as a 1 CP 7k, or you can consider it like a 2 CP 7k that also reactivates one of your category 5 forwards, right? So it's actually a pretty flexible forward in that regard. What makes this card really interesting is that this is the first card we've ever seen with free special abilities. So we've got Spellblade, Dual Wield, and Rapid Fire. Spellblade is choose one forward, deal it 5,000 damage. Dual Wield is until the end of the turn, Bart gets first strike and Bart's power becomes 10,000. And Rapid Fire, until the end of the turn, Bart gains haste, brave, and Bart can attack 3 times his turn. You can only use this ability if Bart says use Spellblade and Dual Wield this turn. I've already spoken a little bit about this in one of my earlier spoiler videos. This card, like I think in most situations, the most relevant S ability is always going to be Dual Wield. Having this guy attack in and become a first strike 10k means it's going to win just nearly every fight, right? So your opponent always has to be afraid that you can just buff your Bart to a big forward and just like kill whatever he's blocking, right? Or whatever's blocking it. Now his third ability is what really makes him exciting. If you can trigger off the first 2 S abilities, and then you can have another Bart to trigger off his third S ability, Rapid Fire, you can attack him 3 times, and your opponent cannot deal with him, right? Like 10k break face first strike is something that your opponent never wants to see. Being a 10k first strike is something that your opponent just can't block with. Every guy that's going to block is almost certainly just going to die, right? And yeah, it's a ton of value if you can trigger this off. But that being said, though, it's extremely difficult. You have to have 3 Barts like in your hand in order to use Rapid Fire, and that is unbelievably difficult to do. You have to actually stack so many Barts in your hand. Unfortunately, the different Barts, they all fulfill different archetypes of decks. So in a competitive strategy, it's very difficult to get like a whole bunch of Barts into your deck while also having them all be useful or relevant to you. The only time where this will be relevant is in title series, where the Barts actually have just really good synergy with each other, right? But outside that scenario, it's very difficult to have a whole bunch of Barts in your deck and have them all relevant to your deck strategy in order to use this Rapid Fire ability, even like somewhat consistently. So because of that, this card just seems like a really fun, cool meme casual strategy, and seems like probably a potentially powerful strategy in competitive title series play. But at this stage, I don't think we'll see him in competitive play too much. So the next card is Bartholomew. He is a free CP backup. When Bartholomew enters the field, you may play 1 card named Hope from your hand onto the field. For Win-Win Dull, put Bartholomew into break zone, choose 1 forward, activate it against plus 1,000 power until the end of turn. Let's look at his second ability of Win-Win Dull Break, right? That is actually a more expensive cost to White Mage that we got in Opus 5, I believe. So in that situation, White Mage was 1 Dull Break, do the exact same thing. give one guy +1,000 power, and reactivate it, right? So it's a more expensive version of that. This card is also a free CP backup that doesn't search for a card. So it doesn't put a card into your hand. It allows you to play a Hope from your hand onto the field. So yes, it is actually pretty cost efficient. So yes, when you do consider the fact that you are getting a forward onto the field that's usually going to be 3 or more CP onto the field, this card is actually pretty good value in that regard, right? Now, the most relevant aspect of this card is his job type. His job type is Father, and there is a Hope later on in this set that we'll talk about that gets a benefit if he has both a job father and a job mother on the field at the same time, right? And so that would be the primary reason why you play Bartholomew, because his job is father, and so he's going to give a bonus to the other Hope that you're going to be playing. This card just isn't particularly good in my opinion. The only reason why you're playing it is because it's the easiest way to get a father job onto the field without going into a secondary color. The next card is Windrake. It is a 2 CP backup, EX Burst. When Windrake enters the field, choose one forward. It cannot attack until the end of your opponent's turn. So this backup I actually like quite a bit. So as a 2 CP backup, it's like a backup that you can just play on your first turn to put a backup down, right? But in the mid game or in the earlier game, when your opponent discards cards to put out a forward early on, for Wind, you generally want to spend more of your time ramping up, and you don't really want to spend CP putting a response down to that forward, but you don't want to take damage as well, right? And Windrake is actually a pretty good play on your like second or third turn after your opponent has played a forward, but you still want to spend a little bit more time ramping up. Windrake is a nice solution to that, right? You get to spend 2 CP, put down a backup, which is a cheap backup, but also just so you get to delay one of your opponent's attacks, which is actually pretty good and pretty cost-effective way to get your backups down as well as stop some early aggression, right? Not only that, it's also an EX Burst as well. So yeah, if you do hit it off an EX Burst, you can stop another attack. So it's actually great as a card to play down in the early game. And then towards the later game, if you do hit it off an EX Burst, it does give you a nice bonus for that as well. So in my opinion, I really do like this card, and I think it's pretty playable. Probably wouldn't run 3 copies of it. 2 is probably fine. It gives you the option of playing it like around the mid game, and also gives you an extra copy in case you do hit it as an EX Burst. So following on from Bartholomew, here we have Hope. He's a free CP 7k forward. If you control a job father and mother, Hope gains plus 2,000 power, and Hope cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities. So this would be the reason why we would play Bartholomew, because then we can get a job father onto the field. Now, obviously, you need to have both a job father and a job mother. Now, there is a backup from Opus 1 called Nora, which has job mother, and that is probably the intentional backup on the field that would allow you to gain this ability, right? So, as if he does have both the bonuses, as a free CP 9k that cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities, that's actually really, really good value. Like, the wind ability of not being able to be chosen by your opponent's abilities is actually really, really strong. Especially in the current metagame, where increasingly it seems like the abilities of cards are getting better, but the abilities or the power of summons aren't getting particularly better, which means that people are going to be much more reliant on card abilities as opposed to summons, in which case abilities like this become just significantly stronger, right? So this is good value as long as you can hit both these backups, right? Now, Bartholomew is the only job father in Wind, but there are actually 2 job mothers in Wind that you can use to boost up Hope. So one obviously is Nora, which does search for a Hope, which is kind of relevant to this. But interestingly enough, Illyria, the first card we talked about in the spoiler, her job is job mother. So you can actually pair up Illyria and Bartholomew to get the bonus of this Hope. So that is a very interesting and relevant thing for potentially building the mono wind strategy, right? So you can create like a stepfather or a stepmother relationship to get Hope his power up. And at a 9,000 power forward that can't be chosen by abilities at free CP, it's actually very, very good. So I'm going to experiment with this card, see how well this gimmick works, and hopefully potentially it might be alright. Following up from some of my other videos, Final Fantasy XIII, this set has released 2 cards that reward you for having more Final Fantasy XIII characters on the field. So those were in the form of Fang, and those were in the form of Sarah. So both these cards have bonuses or have extra power when you have more Final Fantasy XIII characters on the field, right? So it seems primarily that those are going to create a fire-ice strategy, but I also jokingly said it might potentially be possible for you to play a fire-wind or an ice-wind strategy using Hope and his family as well. So potentially it is possible for you to try out like a fire-wind or an ice-wind strategy that has these Final Fantasy XIII characters in it as well. So I think that might be an alternative use for Hope as well. I'm going to try testing it out to see how strong this Hope is and try testing out those combinations as well. I think that those are viable strategies to take those directions of decks in. Next card is Rem. It is a 2 CP forward, EX Burst, 5,000 power. When Rem enters the field, you may discard 1 card. If you do, search one job class 0 cadet and add it to your hand. So some people have just written this off saying it's really bad, because there's already a rem in the game that's 4 CP backup, EX Burst, return a category 0 from your break zone back to your hand, right? So that had the advantage of allowing you to return any card from that set, which is any class 0 cadet, as well as like the summons as well, in the form of Dabalos or Ifrit or Odin. So the benefit of this card is that because it is a forward, you're not actually locked out of playing it just once, right? So if you play the other rem, the backup rem, you play it once, that's about as many times as you can play it at all, unless you destroy your backups, which that deck doesn't want to do, right? But if you play the forward rem, you can play it, search for stuff, and then later on, if this rem dies, then you can play another rem and get its ability again, right? Do note this ability searches for job class 0 cadets, so it searches for these specific students from your deck. It doesn't return any category 0 from your discard or your break zone back to your hand. So they have different targets. Do note that this card says search for any job class 0 cadet, and it doesn't specify forward, right? So that means that you can search for a forward or a backup with this card, and it's not many situations where we have a forward that can search for backups in this game, so it does help you set up. So if you do consider the flexibility of this card and how it helps you set up, then this card is actually more playable than people originally think, right? And here's the thing. Just because you play this as a forward doesn't mean you can't play the rem backup, right? So potentially you can run a 2-1 split. You can run maybe 1 copy of this and 2 copies of the other rem, or go vice versa, right? You play 1 copy of this early on to help you set up, and because the 4 CP backup rem is not particularly good in the early game because there aren't that many targets in your break zone to put back to your hand, this rem is a much better play early on, and then when she dies, you can just play the backup as well, right? And they're both EX Burst, even though this EX Burst is a little bit worse because it's not getting you a free card, but it is getting you a search, right? So this card is not great, but I think that there is a relevance to this card being played.
So guys, what do you think? Were there any cards that are overrated or underrated? What cards do you think that I might have missed something out on, or what cards do you think that I might have judged a little bit too harshly? Do let me know your thoughts and opinions in the description below. If you have any cool ideas, do feel free to share them as well. I do love hearing feedback from you guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I'll be putting out a whole much more content about the Final Fantasy TCG in the near future. I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, Grand J out.